that chest. How many babies got?
Great cash, homie.
The lion, but now I go by lineup. If you cannot make your mind up, you know where to find us. Unless you're a pro and you're really about to optimize, I think you should tune in and I'll help you with your ROI. And welcome back to Leo the Lineup. I am Leo, obviously. It is Saturday afternoon, just killing some time before the MMA squares off. This video is just going to be a quick breakdown of Sunday Night Football between the Steelers and Bills, two teams that I already broke down a little bit last week, so we should have some familiarity there. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Alrighty then. Let's start with the Steelers. You got Big Ben Roethlisberger, as long as he avoids any bathroom stalls. Seems to be a very solid play. My notes have been generated from the last 4 games, pretty much a month of time. I figure that's a decent chunk of the season, especially being in the latter half of the year where everything is kind of solidified and you know more what you get. So last 4 games for all of these stats, something to keep in mind. But like I said, Big Ben Roethlisberger averaging 49 attempts, 292 yards, and 2.25 touchdowns per game in the last 4. Certainly slinging it an awful lot. 50 attempts, meaning, like I said in a prior video, there are lots of targets to go around, and I'll get into them as I hit his receivers. First receiver I want to talk about is Diontae Johnson, the guy who stole Juju's job. Well, his spot in the depth chart. In the last 4 games, he's averaged 13 targets, 86 yards, and got a half a touchdown per game, meaning he scored in 2 of those 4 games, obviously. He looks to be Big Ben's favorite target. The 13 targets on average is by far the most on the team and is quite ridiculous if you ask me. It is one of the heaviest volume shares in the NFL, certainly. But like I said, I like Diontae Johnson. He seems to be more of a safety net for Big Ben, dumping it off short, but he has had a couple big plays. Lots of volume, lots of catches, and there's always that touchdown threat. So next receiver based on DK price I'm going to get into is Chase Claypool. He's averaging the least on the team of all the pass catchers. He figures to be an all-or-nothing type player in my opinion, averaging 7.75 targets, a little over 51 yards a game, and 3/4 of a touchdown. Surprisingly, 3 touchdowns in 4 games, so he is very touchdown live. However, he does get the least targets on the team as far as pass catchers. The next player I want to talk about from the Pittsburgh Steelers is James Conner, and boy are we glad to see him back after Benny Snell's dud last week. He's returning from the COVID list, but he's only averaging 9.67 fantasy points in his last 4 contests in which he actually played in. Not particularly good, however, he can't be as bad as Benny Snell, and he is certainly viable. And then there's Juju Smith-Schuster. The generic wide receiver 1 from this team going into the season got his spot taken by Diontae Johnson, like I mentioned. However, he's still averaging 9.25 targets in his last 4, 40 yards, and has scored 2 touchdowns in those 4 games. Came back to life a little bit, but obviously he is pretty sporadic. It seems like he's targeted a lot or barely targeted at all. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about Juju. One intriguing player on the Pittsburgh Steelers that not a lot of people might be thinking about or looking in depth on is Eric Ebron, the tight end. He has nearly as many targets as Juju Smith-Schuster on average in his last 4 games. He's averaging more yards and still has a touchdown threat, and him being a tight end and Big Ben dumping it off near the goal line is always live. And then there's the Steelers defense at 4,200 on Draftkings and not available on Fanduel because they don't have defense on their slate. Not forcing myself to roster a defense in this matchup of 2 high-powered offenses, but I put the asterisks there because if I were to pick one, I would prefer the Steelers because we have from time to time seen Josh Allen make some bonehead decisions, and that's always beneficial in fantasy. Then there's the kicker, Chris Boswell, who's 3,800 on DK and 9,000 on FanDuel. He's averaging a little bit over 10 points a game, which is actually pretty good for a kicker in this high-powered matchup. I'm not sure what to make of kickers because generally you would want to get through the skill players in a high-powered matchup, but then again, if you look at their box scores, they have put up a lot of points even in high-scoring games. So certainly worth consideration, Chris Boswell. And then there's fucking James Washington, who fucked up everything for us last week. He was seemingly non-existent in the previous 4 games prior to last week and then put up 16 out of nowhere. Just like DFS works. Out of nowhere, 4th string wide receiver puts up 16, changes everything, and that's how you take first place by yourself. Benny Snell, I put FU because we all know why. I'm not really getting to this guy. He screwed us over last week. James Conner is coming back. However, he is a punt play if you figure that a lot of people are going to hate him as well, and maybe he gets a goal line carry or two with James Conner getting eased back in. Anthony McFarland Jr., Jalen Samuels, why? And then there's Vance McDonald. Backup tight end, generally gets a target a game, $200 and 5.5 on FanDuel. Like I said, average maybe a target a game the last 4, a little under, I believe. However, if that target is in the red zone or near the goal line, if somehow this is a low-scoring game, it could turn out to be super beneficial. However, I don't see it happening, and I'm not getting there, but certainly worth a lottery ticket. Like the rappers say nowadays, I am all about my bills. I'm not specifically and personally. However, let's just get into it with that transition. You have Josh Allen, quarterback. He's 12,200 on DK, super expensive. Also 16.5 on FanDuel, but he has been balling. Same 4-game sample size. He is averaging 30 fantasy points, 38 attempts, 308 yards, and 2.5 touchdowns per game. Going to be hard to get away from him. If you can make him work in the MVP, it's going to be tough with those prices. However, he does have some decent priced wide receiver options, I think, that are good value MVP options to get you Josh Allen and maybe Ben and one of his receivers. And then there's the guy who forced his way out of my hometown. No hard feelings, gave us the Minneapolis Miracle, and we love him for it. Stephon Diggs, wide receiver, he's 10K on DK, 14K on FanDuel. Cole Beasley and Gabe Davis are kind of blowing up lately ever since John Brown went on the IR, and I think it's taken a little hit to Stephon Diggs, but I think there's enough to go around, obviously, with how much Josh Allen is throwing and how well he is playing. Still 10 targets a game the last 4 for Steph, primary wide receiver, but he's also, like I said, letting others eat too. And then we got Cole Beasley. Like I said, not only is he a decent rapper, he's a pretty damn good football player. With John Brown on the IR, it certainly elevated his game. MVP value option for DraftKings, certainly. He's coming off a huge game, 30 points, 11 targets, 130 yards, and a touchdown. Gonna be hard to get away from him with John Brown on the IR. This leads me into the Bills' backfield, where the week prior to last week, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss seemingly split the workload evenly. However, last week, Devin Singletary looked to regain the primary running back spot. He had 18 attempts to Zach Moss's 3, I believe. Devin Singletary is in play, and he's about the same price as Zach Moss on FanDuel. So definitely a Devin Singletary spot on FanDuel. Regained his job and could be a sneaky option if the Bills somehow are the team that is winning this game. That brings me to Mr. Gabe Davis, and he has been balling. 3 of his last 4 games, surprisingly, 15.9 fantasy points or above. I think it was 15.9 was the minimum and around 18 was the maximum. However, he's $5,000 on DraftKings. Another value MVP option there, and he's a little priced up, 10K on FanDuel, but still worth it. He has been balling. Look into it. I would play him. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, Zach Moss, I'm really not going to get too much this week. He didn't get much work last week. He could be a random nice play if somehow the Bills decide to shake things up again like they have done before, and you can gain some ownership leverage by playing Zach Moss, but I'm not getting to it very much. That takes me to Dawson Knox. 4,600 on DraftKings, 7,000 on FanDuel. He has a touchdown in each of his last 2 games. However, low volume as he's averaging 2.5 targets in those 2 games. So volume never going to get you there. Touchdowns might, depending on how much score is in this game. Now we're going down a weird route because this next guy, super interesting. Tyler Bass, the kicker, 3,600 on DraftKings, 8,500 on Fanduel. Surprisingly averaging 13.5 fantasy points the last 4 weeks. Some of those games, I think he hit like 18. Super, super good for a kicker. Like I said, should be a high-scoring game. Could work, could blow up. I can't really give you much advice on a kicker because it is kind of random, but he has a damn good average. Like I said, Bills defense, not really trying to get there. Not going to get to defense much in this game. I could see it being a lower scoring game than people may assume. However, it should be a shootout, and it's more likely to be a shootout, so I'm going to stick away from the Bills defense. If I do go defense, I'm going Steelers because Josh Allen, naturally being younger and not as much a veteran as Ben Roethlisberger, I feel like he has the higher likelihood to make a mistake. And then there's Isaiah McKenzie. 1,800 on DraftKings, certainly looks good and cheap. 11 points last week, looks great, but then again, 2 targets, 1 touchdown. I'm not trying to catch lightning in a bottle 2 times in a row, and even if he lets me get more expensive players, I'm just not getting there very much. So that about wraps it up. Obviously, naturally on FanDuel, you are going to like quarterbacks naturally as MVP because they don't inflate the price like DraftKings does. Ben Roethlisberger, specifically Josh Allen, are going to be the highest projected players on this slate. DraftKings, however, they also multiply the MVP price 1.5 times the salary, which makes the expensive guys a little harder to get to. That's where I like one of the receivers from the Steelers or one of these value receivers from the Bills, because that allows you to get all the good guys with some pretty good dependability on your MVP choice. Hope this video was beneficial. Quick little breakdown. Had to get it out there. And until next time, peace out, guys.